Hi, I'm Father Brian Shanley, president of Providence College, and I'd like to share a Christmas reflection for you. We take it for granted that God came a baby, but God could have come into this world in another way. God could have come down as a fully formed adult, said a few edifying things to us, did some miracles, left a testament, and poof, gone right back to heaven. The incarnation need not have been what it was. And the fact that it was what it was tells us something important about God and tells us something important about ourselves. Because if God had come and became flesh for just a little while, God would not really have shared our life. God would have shared a slice of a human life, but not a whole human life. And what we celebrate on Christmas is the fact that God lived a full human life. God was born into the world, and as we know, God would die on a cross in this world. So God lives a whole human life in its entirety, from birth to death. And not just from birth to death, but from the most vulnerable kind of birth and the most vulnerable kind of death. As we all know from the manger story, God was born homeless. He was born with animals around him, with shepherds whom we romanticize but would have been considered pretty disreputable characters in those days. He was born a child that needed to be held. He was born a child that needed to be burped, needed to be cleaned, needed to be coddled and taken care of by his mother and his father. He was cold and he was hungry. Pretty on early in Jesus' life, he's going to be a refugee, which is important for us to remember in a time when there are so many people who are refugees in our world, that Jesus knows what it's like to be a refugee as he flees with his mother and his father to escape the corrupt political power that he grew up under. Jesus knows what it's like to be vulnerable to political power and to persecution. On the other end of Jesus' life, he would die the most ignominious kind of death on the cross. He would die by public helplessness. He would die next to disreputable people. He would die unjustly condemned of something he didn't do. And he would die on the cross and be laid in a pauper's tomb. And in between that vulnerable birth and that vulnerable death, Jesus lived a very ordinary life. For most of his adult life, he was, the Greek word is tekton, could mean carpenter. I've heard people say it's more like handyman. He was an ordinary person in an obscure Palestinian town for years and years, until he ends his life as an itinerant preacher with a small band of followers around him, not knowing where he was going to lay his head on the next life. So from birth to death and everything in between, Jesus knows what it's like from the inside to be a vulnerable human being. And he chose it that way instead of that other way, to let us know how much God loves us, that God loves us enough to share the vulnerability of a complete human life. And perhaps even more importantly for us, it tells us that the entirety of our lives, even when we feel most vulnerable, can be a sign of holiness. That Jesus has made holy everything that is good in human life from birth to death. That by taking on a human life and making it divine, and by sharing our frailties, Jesus, in the great exchange of Christmas, lifts us up even as he humbles himself, and gives us the potential in the entirety of our lives to bear witness, to incarnate the Word made flesh. And that's the good news of Christmas, that God is with us in all that is difficult in our human lives, and that God's gift of himself to us in incarnation means that the entirety of our human lives, from birth to death, from ordinary work to everything in between, can be the bearer of the divine. That is the great gift of Christmas that Jesus gives to us. Merry Christmas.